Hello and welcome to this continuation of this course where we will start exploring Active Directory. In the previous video we created a virtual network and we could get the server and our workstation to talk to each other through pings, and that's been successful. So now we need to start exploring the server into detail by adding this very first own roles and features, which is Active Directory services. But before we do that, we need to just have a look at some theoretical background of what Active Directory is. So Active Directory is what we will be exploring in this section. We need to know what it is. We need to know what are some of the key components of Active Directory, its benefits, and what are some of the common administrative tasks that you would be exploring when you're an IT system administrator. And what are some of the tools that are used for administrating those tasks? And what are some of the best practices? I'm just going to fly through this now. So Active Directory is basically a centralized directory service provided by Microsoft. So Microsoft provided the server, and then they provided the services that can run on the server. And one of the services is Active Directory, which is basically used to manage network resources. And these network resources are users, computers, and a whole wide range of other resources. So this one in particular would be focusing more about users and computers and network services, how these users and computers can talk to each other from a high level point of view. It also stores information about objects on a network and also makes this information available to users and administrators. So just keep that in mind. And the next thing we need to talk about is, so we've explored that it's used to manage network resources. So what are some of the components that are on the Active Directory that are used to manage network resources? So we have a domain, and you might be wondering, what is a domain? A domain is just a logical group of network objects. So if you have users, computers, and devices all within a centralized database, that's called a domain. So that centralized database is called a domain, which contains all those users, computers, and devices, their IDs, and various information that we'll be exploring in this course. A domain controller is used to manage a domain. It's basically straightforward. Now, a domain controller is used to manage a domain from an authoritative point of view, such that it is used to authenticate users. So if someone says, I belong to this network, what rights do you have to access this network? I have a username and I have a password. That's what authentication is for. And that can only be provided by a domain controller. And a domain controller is normally configured on a Windows server using Active Directory services. So aside a domain controller, with that being understood, now that we have a domain controller that's used to authenticate and secure users and computers, when it comes to users and computers, they're not just lying around within the domain without any structure. There's some level of structuring of how these users and computers are managed. That's what we have organizational units for. So it's more like a container that you can put objects, groups, and computers inside it and say, okay, so this is a cluster of people. This is a cluster of computers. This is a cluster of a group of people that I only want to manage in a specific way, separate from another group of people. And organizational units are essential because when you have such level of clustering groups of things, objects, users, and computers, that means you can apply certain specific security protocols or security policies to that group. So that means whatever is contained within that group is going to have those security protocols and policies applied to them. So for instance, if you have an organizational unit that has a user with your computer and you said, okay, I want all users with this names or within this group, I want them to be having this specific wallpaper as your desktop wallpaper, and you apply it to them, it means they will have that specific wallpaper on their device. Or if it's a finance department, let's say a finance department is the most sensitive department because they have information with bank accounts and stuff like that. So you want their security level access to be highly complicated. So you want anyone who is a user within the finance department, they need to have a high level of password complexities. They need to have a minimum password policy of say 14 characters or 20 characters or 32-bit characters. Then you can create a policy, a protocol, and apply that to that organizational unit. So that organizational unit would only have people that are within the finance. And when you do that, it means they can only have that kind of password management. So that brings us to the next section, which is group policy. Group policy basically is how you set those protocols and apply it to organizational units. So it's a feature that allows administrators to implement specific configurations for users and computers. So those are the key components of Active Directory. If you know that, then how do you go about managing those active components? There are certain tools. So now that we've talked about them, we just need to also demonstrate, or we just need to also talk about what tools within the server can you manually click and go into and do those configurations. We'll explore that in the next slide that's coming up. But before that, so we just need to double check on what are the benefits of Active Directory. So if you have a key understanding of all that I just explained about the components, you have a sense of feeling that there's some level of centrality. You can manage a group of people from one point rather than having to go to one of each of those people to do those changes. So Active Directory gives us a centralized management benefit where you can manage users and groups at once using a single point of administration. And you can also apply security protocols like the one I just talked about with the passwords. And it's highly scalable and it supports redundancy. You can have multiple domain controllers that can be fault tolerant. If one fails, it fails over to the other one. Some of the common administrative tasks that you might be doing, which is all mutually coherent with all that we've explained previously, as you have to be creating those users that you want to be managing. You can modify them. So user management comes into play. Putting those users in groups, creating groups, clustering people according to specific purpose and stuff like that. That would be group management. So as a sysadmin, you'll be managing groups. And computer management. So when users have computers that are on the network, you would have a way of also managing all those computers by adding them to the domain so that they can be able to receive such security protocols from a centralized point of view. And then you can also be configuring the policies and applying to those computers through groups and organizational units. So the tools that you'll be using to do all these, it's not like you just whisper and then they happen. No, you'd have to go through some specific graphic user interface tools. And some of these are the snap-ins that we'll be talking about. We'll be exploring them in the next couple of videos. So we have the Active Directory users and computers. That when you open that application, it gives you all the information you need about users. So it's used to manage AD objects such as users, computers, groups, organizational units, and a whole lot more. We also have the web-based interface, but this one normally you would in environments where you have a hybrid environment where the on-premise domain controller or there's a link between online Office 365 services to on-prem servers. For instance, when it comes to Active Directory, you can have Microsoft Azure Active Directory, which is a web-based interface. So you can make changes on the Active Directory on your server, and then it syncs across over to the cloud platform as your Active Directory. So more like in the likes of that. We might be exploring that in this video. And if you want to do anything to do with managing group policies, where you can configure those policies and stuff that you can apply to users and computers through organizational units, there's a tool for that called the GPMC. So it's a snap-in. It's just an application that you open, and then you can go about clicks. Within a few clicks, then you apply, then you're there. So these are some of the tools. You can also use PowerShell. So Windows PowerShell is more like the advanced version of command prompts. that you can use, enter commands that can interact with Active Directory. And it's normally used when you're in the process of creating a whole lot of repetitive tasks that you can't be doing manually, and you need a way to automate them, which we will be exploring in this course as well. And finally, some of the best practices for Active Directory. If you're a sysadmin and you're going through all this user processes when it comes to administrative tasks, there are certain key things that you need to be familiar with. Best practices basically to make your job easier. You should have a regular backup. If you have a way of regularly backing up your Active Directory database, whenever there's an issue, you can always roll it back. You wouldn't lose data. You wouldn't break any systems. And you should always assign permissions based on the least privilege. So someone who needs access to a specific folder and they only need to read it, they only need to open the file, they don't need to make changes. You need to give them read permissions to that folder. You don't have to give them full write permissions. So something like that. Always minimize the risk, minimize security risk by giving the least privilege. And you should always document anything you change, anything you make, any new setups, document them so that whenever someone else needs to do them, they can easily do it. It's not going to be just you that can do it. And you should also monitor and audit changes that are being made and monitor how it implements within the organization. If you have this at the back of your head, you wouldn't have any problems as a sysadmin. So I'll see you in the next video where we would be installing Active Directory services on our server 2019. We'll configure it together with DNS, and then we'll join our Windows 11 workstation to the domain, and we'll see how that works. And then from then onwards, we will start exploring more of the administrative tasks that we have explored as the key components of Active Directory. It's going to be fun. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.